my brother V2 unfortunately sent his regrets from China. It's his first time in China, so he's enjoying himself there, and he had booked it much in advance before this. It's really heartwarming to see so many people in this room tonight in support of this library. The Book Gala Committee has asked me tonight to actually speak about my family's history with Uxbridge. But looking around and seeing so many familiar faces and the usual suspects in this room, it's quite obvious to me that I think most of you already know about some of my history. V2 and I both come from a family of 7 kids. Our family fled Vietnam as boat refugees back in the 1979. And most of you also know that we were sponsored here to Canada by an amazing group of people here in Uxbridge. That group was led by Barb and Ted Murphy, and I think Barb is in this room tonight. Most of you will know Barb because she's highly involved with this library as well. She holds it dear in her heart. But it was because of people like Barb and Ted who we will forever be indebted to. We were able to come to Canada and call this our new home and start a new life here. We've been touched by so many people like the Murphys and the Ball family, and I could go on forever and ever up here, but unfortunately I only have 5 minutes. And the boat ride itself took 4 days and 4 nights. So today I'd like to spend that 5 minutes talking about a certain individual who's had a profound influence on me personally and my family. Her name is Doris Muckle. If you've ever had the pleasure of meeting her, you'll know how blessed I feel just to have such a beautiful human being in my life. It's because of Doris that I developed my own joy of reading. Every time we visited Doris in Uxbridge, without fail, she would always ask me, "What have you been reading lately? What have you been reading lately? What have you been reading lately?" And just as my patients, some of my patients who floss right before their dental appointments, I always made sure I was reading something because I didn't want to disappoint her. And at first it was like a chore. I kept reading only just to answer her question. But over time, just like with flossing, as you read more and more every day, you eventually grow to learn to love it. And it's because of Doris I had that impetus to actually enjoy reading, and I have that with me for the rest of my life now. Doris's connection with my family actually grows much earlier than that. When we first moved into Toronto in 1981 from Uxbridge, we moved to an area called Jamestown, and this was an area of government-subsidized housing. Not exactly the area where you'd want to raise your own kids and family. There's a lot of crime, gang violence, and even to this day, I would be very nervous walking in there in broad daylight. But we lived there for about 3 years because that's all we could afford at the time. And my parents knew that we had to get out of that area as fast as we could. And so after about 3 years in that area, Ted Murphy drove my parents around to another neighborhood looking for another home. And my parents found what they thought was the most beautiful house for us. It was a small 4-bedroom house that could accommodate all 7 kids. The only minor problem was that my dad was making $4 an hour, and the down payment for the house was $20,000, which we had nothing of. So as our dreams of owning this house slowly faded away, Ted Murphy came to my dad and said, "I found someone in Uxbridge, an anonymous donor, who was willing to give you $20,000 as an interest-free loan to pay for this down payment. And you have to keep in mind, this is at the time when mortgage rates were 12%. My family had no credit history. My parents spoke no English. So there was no guarantee that this loan would ever be repaid. Yet this person was willing to vouch for my family. And my dad gladly accepted that money on one condition, that we find out who that person was. And we wrestled that name out of Ted Murphy, and we found out that person was none other than Doris Muckham. It's not often that a complete stranger would touch your life like that, but when it does happen, you will remember it forever. Money can always be repaid, but acts of kindness, like the ones we've received from the people in Uxbridge, those can never be paid back. They can only be paid forward, which is what my family and I will be doing for the rest of our lives. I went to visit Doris a couple of weeks ago, and she's just turned 92 this year. Unfortunately, her eyesight has deteriorated to the point where she can't read anymore, which is one of the most important things she's taught me to do. Her body has weakened to the point where she has to spend most of the day in bed. Yet despite all of these challenges, and all the physical challenges she's been going through, I am completely amazed to see that Doris is still putting other people before herself. From her bed, she has organized all of the nurses in the retirement home to go around and collect used stamps so that they can be sent off to Leprosy Mission Canada, so that they can be sold to raise funds for that charity. It just goes to show that the giving should never stop. And that day, just before I left, she asked me, "What have you been reading lately?" So if you've got a glass handy, please raise your glass in honor of Doris Muckham and the Uxbridge Public Library, which Doris has so thoroughly enjoyed throughout her life. May you all never stop giving, and please never stop asking, what have you been reading lately? Thank you.